Out of the 10 richest people in the world in 2025, according to Forbes magazine, 5 are of Jewish descent. Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Facebook, Larry Ellison from Oracle, Larry Page and Sergey Brin from Google, and Steve Ballmer from Microsoft. Not bad for a population of only 15 million people worldwide. Also, even though Jews make up less than 2% of the population of the United States, year after year they account for around 20% of the list of the 400 richest people in the country. But beyond these super rich tycoons, are Jews wealthier than the rest? In the United States, 54% of Jewish families have an annual income of more than $100,000, while that figure is only 19% for the total US population. And this disproportion is seen in every country where there are significant Jewish communities. We are talking about ordinary people, without any kind of special advantage, who generally do much better than people from other religious groups. But this is not a coincidence. There are things this group of people does differently from others that help them prosper. And to begin to understand why this happens, we need to understand a bit of their history. For centuries, Jews were persecuted and marginalized around the world, which forced them to develop skills to survive and thrive in adverse situations. Being successful became a matter of life or death for them. It all begins in the year 135, when Emperor Hadrian defeats the Jewish armies who were punished and expelled from Jerusalem. So they had no choice but to spread across the known world. During the Middle Ages, many Jews took advantage of the small communities that were forming and migrated to Western and Central Europe, fleeing oppression and persecution in the Middle East and North Africa. However, they didn't find much acceptance in Europe. From the Middle Ages until the Second World War, Jews were the target of systematic discrimination, including legal restrictions, expulsions, and organized violence. They were forbidden from holding public office and joining guilds, which excluded them from most professions. They were not allowed to be peasants or craftsmen. During the Crusades between the 11th and 13th centuries, they were massacred in several European cities, as the Crusaders saw them as internal enemies of Christianity. In many places, they were forced to live in segregated neighborhoods and were repeatedly expelled from various parts of Europe. In 1290, Edward I of England expelled all Jews from the country. The same happened in France in 1394, in Spain in 1492, in Portugal in 1497, and in many other places. Also, in some places where they were allowed to return, severe restrictions were imposed. For example, they could not own land. But in medieval Europe, investing in real estate was one of the main ways to accumulate wealth. So since they were forbidden from owning land and many professions were closed to them, they had almost no choice but to go into trade, a profession that you could also carry with you if you were expelled. A true form of wealth that couldn't be confiscated. Thus, Jews created trade networks that crossed borders of countries and continents to trade among themselves. Their ability to communicate across cultures was a critical advantage. For centuries, Jews were at least bilingual and often fluent in multiple languages. They spoke Hebrew or Yiddish at home, the local language in the streets, and often learned additional tongues for trade. In a time of great conflict, with huge cultural, linguistic, and even religious barriers between different regions, Jews were able to thrive in the trade of many goods. Mainly valuable products like spices, silk, gold, silver, and diamonds, which were easy to transport but hard to value and sell. These products were often sold on credit, so the trust and reputation of the buyers were essential. And this trust was only possible in small groups where everyone knew each other, like in the Jewish community. A Jewish merchant from the 13th century could buy wool in Amsterdam from peasants at a market in the city, then travel to Cairo to sell those products to a Jewish merchant who spoke and wrote the same language, and who had the same Jewish traditions and economic laws. Then he would return to Europe with spices and some other valuable goods. These trade and financial networks and routes gave Jews a great advantage, allowing them to access markets closed to other groups. While Catholic gemstone merchants had to spend a fortune on security and lawsuits, Jewish merchants knew another Jew would never cheat them, because automatically all the other Jews would know he was a fraud, and he would be excluded from business forever. In this way, Jewish merchants formed a small bourgeoisie that, little by little, grew wealthy, with their influence reaching into various industries even to this day. For example, Jews still dominate the diamond trade, and Israel is one of the 3 major centers of the industry. But as Jewish merchants became wealthier, they found a new economic opportunity in financial intermediation. In the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church forbade usury, that is, charging interest on loans. The church saw lending with interest as a form of economic exploitation that equated to stealing from the poor. This allowed Jews to enter the money-lending business, as they were not subjected to these religious restrictions. Jewish oral traditions taught that there were moral circumstances where charging interest was allowed. Lending money with interest was acceptable as long as the terms were fair and clearly established. In fact, Jewish tradition considers lending money, instead of giving it away, an act of charity. By lending, others can start their own business and keep their independence and dignity in the process. This positive attitude toward loans and interest led many Jews to become lenders and bankers. Over time, Jewish bankers earned a reputation for being finance experts and fair in business. At the same time, Jewish bankers also created currency exchange systems that enabled trade across Europe. This led many non-Jews to trust them with their money and use their banking services. As the European economy developed and expanded, Jewish bankers played a crucial role in financing trade and supporting entrepreneurs, and also in financing many European monarchs, who borrowed money from them and charged them huge taxes. Many times, they even ended up expelling them from their countries and confiscating their wealth to avoid paying their debts. This history of persecution and discrimination also explains why the Jewish community has developed a strong sense of community. In Jewish tradition, there is a concept of arevut, which means that all Jews are responsible for one another. This means that anyone has the duty to help other members of the community, ensuring that no one is left behind. This internal solidarity allowed them to create support networks that encourage collaboration and the exchange of knowledge and resources among members. They developed mutual aid mechanisms where wealthier members helped the poorer and more vulnerable to settle and progress. They set up interest-free loan funds, institutions that provided money to those who needed it to start businesses or pay off debts without having to turn to outside lenders. And also, charity associations managing community funds to help widows, orphans, and people in economic hardship. But this support was not improvised or spontaneous. Over time, Jewish communities developed highly organized systems of charity. Specialized organizations provided everything a person might need, from free food and loans to education and even burial services. In many cases, entire infrastructures were built to ensure that no member of the community would ever be left behind, regardless of their personal wealth. This institutionalized generosity became a backbone of Jewish resilience across generations. In many cases, young entrepreneurs didn't have to turn to external banks at all. They could rely on family members, friends, or community funds to secure the initial capital needed to start a business, buy a home, or invest in an education. This internal access to funding created a powerful engine of social mobility, allowing new generations to rise without being dependent on outside institutions that often discriminated against them. Even the communal nature of traditional Jewish life provided a useful network of connections. Traditional Jewish prayer requires a quorum of 10 men, called a minyan, and every synagogue in every city has one. So every time a Jewish businessman travels, he can join a minyan and find a series of opportunities to build new relationships. And since this type of network is always growing and evolving, there are always new possibilities. This principle of mutual responsibility has remained to this day, functioning as a protection system in times of crisis and a platform for growth in times of stability. And it became even more critical after the traumas of the 20th century. The Holocaust not only decimated Jewish populations, but also reinforced the absolute necessity of internal solidarity. After surviving unimaginable horrors, Jewish communities doubled down on savings, entrepreneurship, and mutual aid, ensuring that future generations would be prepared to face an uncertain world with resilience and strength. But this mutual responsibility also extends to education, which must be for everyone, not just the rich. It is considered a duty to help others get an education, as knowledge is seen as a tool for success and social mobility. Unlike many cultures where education has always been exclusive to elites, in Judaism, even the poorest were expected to study. And this is another key to Jewish success. Jews understand that to make a living, they had to focus on things that couldn't be taken from them if they were expelled or persecuted. That's why they got so involved in trading metals and precious stones, which are easy to hide and move, but very valuable. And that's also why they turned to acquiring knowledge, an intangible asset that can't be stolen and they could carry with them if they had to migrate. So, the economic and social restrictions, the persecutions, and the repeated expulsions led education to become a top priority for Jews. A Jewish home is often filled with books, and children are introduced to reading and studying the Torah from a very young age. This develops their analytical and critical thinking skills, as well as strong discipline for learning. This contrasts with other religions where reading is not necessary, since religious authorities are always there to interpret the sacred texts. This central focus on education is the reason why, throughout history, Jews have had high literacy rates. And it is also the reason why, even though Jews only represent 0.2% of the world's population, there's a disproportionately large number of books published each year about Jewish topics. According to a Pew Research study, Jews are the most educated religious group in the world. On average, Jews receive 13.4 years of education, while groups like Hindus and Muslims barely reach 5.6 years. This higher level of education allows them to access better job opportunities and higher salaries. Another major contributor to Jewish success is the traditional emphasis on abstract and analytical thinking. For centuries, Jewish education centered on the study of complex religious texts like the Talmud, where students were encouraged to question, debate, interpret, and reframe ideas critically. This constant exercise in logical reasoning and argumentation trained minds capable of handling ambiguity, solving problems creatively, and thinking strategically. These cognitive skills translated exceptionally well into modern professions that require high-level analysis, such as law, medicine, finance, academia, and scientific research. Thus, the intellectual habits developed in religious study halls became assets in secular modernity. The impact of this cultural devotion to education is reflected in some astonishing statistics. Although Jews represent only about 0.2% of the world's population, they account for more than 20% of all Nobel Prize winners. This remarkable achievement spans fields such as physics, chemistry, medicine, economics, literature, and peace, showcasing the extraordinary contribution of Jewish intellect to global progress. Financial education is also key in Jewish families, who do not only know how to make money, but also how to protect it, and how to ensure that future generations don't squander the wealth created by their parents or grandparents, which is very common in families that make a lot of money. It's likely that kids from working-class families, where everyone must struggle to get things, end up learning important life skills, and they may end up better off than kids from wealthy families who have no incentive to fight and do things right. That's why, if we're going to make a lot of money, we also have to create some kind of protection so our children don't waste all that wealth, so that our children and grandchildren are not destroyed by our success. And Jews are very good at this, too. In non-Jewish families, financial education is often limited to teaching children to get a good job. But in the Jewish community, parents tend to model healthy financial habits so that their children learn to manage money responsibly. From a young age, Jewish children are taught the importance of living below their means, saving diligently, and investing wisely. There is a strong cultural emphasis on resisting unnecessary consumerism and focusing instead on building lasting wealth. A common lesson is to sacrifice present pleasures for future benefits. A reminder that working hard today can lead to a successful business tomorrow. There are religious texts that address topics such as money management, investing, and risk management. For example, the Talmud discusses matters related to trade and money lending, offering advice on how to handle personal finances. Also, the Book of Proverbs in the Hebrew Bible contains numerous tips on financial management. We also cannot forget that historic persecutions against Jews forced them to develop great resilience and a strong entrepreneurial spirit. Because being excluded from political power structures, social mobility for Jews depend on financial success. That's why business and community have always been closely linked, which is the opposite of the teachings in other religious groups that believe money is bad and the root of all problems because it can corrupt man. In Christianity, there are phrases like, "It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God." So, while in Christian tradition, money and wealth were seen as something bad, in Judaism, the perspective is totally different. For Jews, making money, doing business, and being rich is something good, morally honest, and noble. Judaism promotes the idea that wealth is a blessing and a great responsibility. It is believed that money must be managed wisely and used to create more wealth, as well as to help others. In Judaism, poverty is not seen as a virtue, but as a condition that must be fought with work and effort. Furthermore, Jewish tradition promotes a vision that has served as a cultural model, encouraging Jews to follow the path of financial success. For example, the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, presents the first Jews as prosperous and successful individuals. A religious culture with role models of rich and successful people to look up to is key to the success of their community. To help you understand, I'm going to tell you a brief anecdote. In 1953, the New Zealander Edmund Hillary was the first man to climb Mount Everest, with the Sherpa Tenzing Norgay. Today, many people climb Mount Everest every summer, so much that there's a trash problem at the summit because so many people go up there. But why didn't anyone do it before 1953? Because no one believed it was possible. But as soon as Edmund Hillary proved it was possible, many people started doing it. And that's what happens with Jews. From their own religious writings to the hundreds of examples of prosperous and successful people in their communities around the world, it's easy for any Jewish child to believe that with work and effort, it's possible to succeed. Their historical experience built a powerful model of intergenerational resilience. Jewish families taught their children not only skills and knowledge, but also mental frameworks designed to survive hardship. Children grew up hearing family histories of struggle, displacement, rebuilding, and eventual success. These stories transmitted essential values: perseverance, optimism, hard work, education, and solidarity. Thus, each new generation did not have to reinvent resilience from scratch. It inherited a proven playbook for thriving even under adverse conditions. Another crucial factor behind Jewish success has been their extraordinary adaptability. Forced to relocate countless times throughout history, Jewish communities became experts at adjusting quickly to new languages, new laws, and new economic systems. Wherever they arrived, whether in Amsterdam, Cairo, Warsaw, or New York, they rapidly learned how to navigate local markets, identify new opportunities, and rebuild their networks. Adaptability was not optional. It became an ingrained survival skill passed from generation to generation. In a modern world characterized by constant change, this historical habit of rapid adaptation turned into a major competitive advantage. A history full of persecution made Jews develop skills, strategies, and tools that allowed them to move forward. Many end up amassing enormous fortunes that they reinvested in more education and more opportunities for their families and community. But can all of this explain why Jews are still wealthier today and occupy so many positions of power in the United States and Europe? The thing is, when conditions changed, Jews were there to take advantage of the opportunities. After having been persecuted for centuries, when modern secular states developed, Jews were well prepared to take on leadership roles in politics, business, and academia. In the modern free and capitalist societies of the United States and Europe, Jews thrived like never before. So then, are Jews wealthier than others? Well, statistically, yes, they are. Although not all of them are rich and many are poor, on average, they do better than the rest. And what do you think? What other reasons can you find to explain this? I would love to hear your opinion, so please leave your comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't miss the next one.